Let me ask you something. When was the last time you heard Deshaun Watson say anything? Not a press conference. Not a radio spot. Not even a casual Instagram story from a workout. Nothing. Radio silence. 536 days without a single NFL snap, and somehow the man at the center of the most catastrophic contract in modern football history has nothing to say. No updates. No fire. No urgency. Just quiet. Now flip that picture completely. While Watson has been somewhere in Europe posing for photos and collecting checks, Shedeur Sanders has been inside the Browns facility every single day, working with the receivers, watching film, learning the playbook, grinding in whatever corner of that building would have him. No cameras following him around, no entourage, no spectacle. Just a quarterback who plays like the job is already his, and he just needs to prove it to the people who haven't figured out yet. That contrast right there, that tells you the entire story. But stick with me, because this goes so much deeper than just who's putting in more effort. This is about a front office that has already made its decision, a head coach who has been chasing this quarterback for years, a financial disaster hiding in plain sight, and a franchise that is quietly, carefully, methodically building its future around one name. And that name is Shedeur Sanders. The Browns just haven't said it out loud yet. Let's start with the number that should end every argument before it even begins. 19. 5 seasons in Cleveland. Nearly $250 million in fully guaranteed money. 3 first-round draft picks traded away. And 19 games played. Say that slowly. 19 games. I have watched this league for a long time, and I genuinely cannot locate a more catastrophic roster construction error in the modern NFL era. And that is not a hot take dressed up to sound smart. That is just arithmetic doing what arithmetic does. A 33.1 total QBR. 9 wins, 10 losses as a starter. 19 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. And then, as if the universe itself wanted to make statement, Watson ruptures his Achilles in Week 7 of 2024. Then, and this is the part where you almost have to laugh to keep from crying if you're a Browns fan, he re-ruptures it during his own recovery. Missed all of last season. Only just cleared medically heading into this off-season program. $300 million. 19 games. 2 Achilles. 30 years old. You genuinely cannot make this up. And now the Browns are supposed to hand him the starting job and tell their fan base to believe this time will be different. That this is the year it finally clicks? Come on. Nobody in that building actually believes that. Not the coaches. Not the front office. Not the analytics staff. The competition might be real on paper, and they'll sell it that way publicly because they have to, but the outcome already has a name on it. Here's where it gets interesting, though, because Shedeur Sanders was never supposed to be in this position. Not even close. He came into Cleveland as a 5th-round pick. And I need you to really sit with what that classification means in NFL language. 5th round is the league whispering, and not even quietly, that they don't see you as a franchise cornerstone. 5th round is closer to a practice squad audition than a genuine developmental investment. Before he could even make a first impression in training camp, an oblique strain wiped out his entire preseason. So he sat. He watched film. He took mental reps. He did everything right and got almost nothing back in return. Then November arrived, Cleveland's hand got forced, and suddenly this 5th-round kid nobody was supposed to count on was standing under center. 7 starts. Over 1,400 passing yards. 7 touchdowns. Yes, 10 interceptions, and I'm not going to bury that number because his critics certainly didn't. But a rookie quarterback on a broken team, working with a shaky offensive line and no elite weapons, still managed to earn a Pro Bowl selection. The first Browns quarterback to do that since Derek Anderson back in 2007. You don't accidentally do that. That's a player refusing to let the circumstances define him, forcing the football world to sit up and pay attention when everything around him was screaming, "Don't bother." And then he went out and beat the Pittsburgh Steelers. Then the Cincinnati Bengals. On a team that had absolutely no business winning either one of those games. When a 5th-round quarterback with limited resources and borrowed time goes into divisional games and wins, you don't bench that guy. You don't hand his job to someone who's been collecting paychecks from a lawn chair. You build around him. That's what smart organizations do. And whatever Cleveland's track record says about their decision-making historically, they are making the smart call here. Now, the analytics crowd has their counterarguments locked and loaded, so let's deal with them directly. Shedeur ranked 64th out of 78 qualifying quarterbacks last season by EPA per dropback, threw an interception on 4% of his attempts. Those are ugly numbers, no question about it. But here's what the people waving those stats around conveniently leave out every single time: context. He was a fifth-round pick. On a terrible team. With a coaching staff that wasn't actively developing him, no real investment behind him, and a receiver room that wouldn't scare anybody. Putting up rough numbers in that environment isn't a red flag. It's practically the expected outcome. The question was never whether he lit up the box score. The question was whether he showed something. And the answer clearly was yes, because weak quarterbacks don't manufacture game-winning drives against divisional opponents. Character does. Toughness does. The kind of thing that doesn't live in any metric, but absolutely shows up when it matters most. Let's talk about Todd Monken for a second, because I think this might be the most underrated storyline in this entire situation. This is a head coach who tried to recruit Shedeur Sanders when he was at Georgia, who tried to draft him with the Baltimore Ravens, who walked into his very first Browns press conference, looked the kid in the eye and said, and I'm barely paraphrasing here, "We tried to get you last year." That is not a fun little coincidence. That is not a throwaway anecdote. That is a coach who has been tracking this quarterback's trajectory for years, long before Cleveland was ever part of the equation. And now they're in the same building working toward the same goal. And Monken hasn't exactly been hiding where his head is at. At the league meetings, he sat down, got asked a simple question about his quarterback room, and chose every single word with surgical precision. He talked about playmaking ability. He talked about inner confidence. He talked about a young quarterback who didn't grow up in a pro-style offense and how it's his job, the head coach's job, to develop him. Read that language carefully. That is not, "let's see how training camp goes" language. That is not cautious evaluation talk. That is a head coach publicly staking his reputation on a quarterback's development arc. That is investment language. Monken basically drew a circle around Shedeur Sanders and told the entire league, "This one is mine." The people with real access to this situation are all landing in the same place. Zach Jackson at The Athletic, as well-sourced a Browns insider as exists anywhere, went on record saying he feels more strongly than ever that Sanders is the clear frontrunner, that the job is Sanders to lose, and that handing him every available opportunity isn't just the smart move, it's the only sensible one. That's not speculation. When Zach Jackson says something that direct, he's reporting what he's been told. Then there's Tim Hasselbeck at ESPN, and this one genuinely stopped me when I came across it. Back in February, Hasselbeck went on television and said with total confidence that there wasn't a single franchise in the league that should look at Shedeur Sanders and build their future around him. Strong. Dismissive. No wiggle room. And then in early April, full reversal. He went on NFL Live and said plainly that Watson has no realistic shot at winning this competition. He walked through the whole thing. Too long away from real game action. 2 Achilles injuries at 30. A locker room standing eroded by years of absence and disappointment. And Shedeur, in his words, find himself in a genuinely remarkable position given everything stacked against him just 12 months ago. When your loudest public skeptic does a complete 180, that is not nothing. That is a signal about how this is being read around the entire league. Dan Graziano at ESPN is pointing the same direction, outlining a scenario where Sanders enters the offseason program as the de facto starter and carries that all the way into September. And his core argument keeps returning to the same inescapable reality. Nobody knows what they're actually getting from Deshaun Watson in 2026. Nobody. You cannot build a season around that level of uncertainty. You cannot ask a fan base to emotionally invest in a quarterback whose availability is a genuine question mark. You cannot construct a competitive offense around a 30-year-old coming off 2 torn Achilles tendons who hasn't finished a game since 2023. That's not harsh. That's just honest. And here's the angle that the football-only crowd keeps sleeping on. Shedeur Sanders is not just a quarterback. He's a phenomenon. One of the most recognizable names in sports before he ever threw an NFL pass. His father is Deion Sanders. His college career was appointment television for millions of people who had never watched a Colorado football game in their lives. He has a global audience that doesn't currently watch the Cleveland Browns. The Browns are building a new stadium. They need to sell tickets. They need a reason for people who have never given Cleveland a second thought to suddenly care. Deshaun Watson does not bring that. Dylan Gabriel certainly doesn't either. But Shedeur walks through the door and instantly becomes the most marketable player on the roster, maybe in the entire AFC North. You don't get that kind of opportunity twice in a generation and pass on it. So here is where everything stands. The front office knows what this is. The coaching staff knows what this is. The insiders and analysts who've actually watched the tape and talked to people inside that building know what this is. And now you know what this is too. This is not a competition with an uncertain outcome. This is a transition that has already happened in every way that actually matters, in the conversations behind closed doors, in where the first team reps are going, in the tone of every report leaking out of Cleveland. The official announcement is just the last box to check. If you're a Browns fan who's been burned before, and let's be real, if you've been watching this team for any length of time, you've been burned before, I understand the hesitation. I understand why you'd rather see it before you believe it. But watch what's happening right now. Watch who's in that facility. Watch what the head coach is saying and how he's saying it. Watch where every single credible voice in this conversation is pointing. And then ask yourself honestly whether this feels different. Because it does. It genuinely does. If this is the kind of breakdown you want more of, real analysis, no fluff, no noise, hit subscribe right here on Browns Breakout, and make sure you like this video so more people find it. This is just the beginning of what this team is about to become, and you're going to want to be here for all of it. Shedeur Sanders is already QB1 in Cleveland. The Browns just haven't said out loud yet, but they will. And when they do, remember, you heard it here first.